Hello, folks. Welcome. As we slowly enter, I'm watching the numbers go up. If only our stock market worked that way now. As you all adjust your Zoom, I'll make sure I'll be talking so you can know that your sound is working. I'm Isaac Zablocki. I'm the director of film programs at the JCC here in Manhattan. Well, I'm not in Manhattan at the moment, but you know what I mean. It's good to see so many familiar faces. Keep your cameras on if you can. It's okay, we're all in pajamas, really. We're gonna get started in just a couple of minutes. Nice to see so many friends here, wow. We'll just give it a couple of minutes for everyone to join in on their Zoom, and then we'll get started with the Q&A, and I'll introduce our panel for tonight. I hope you have all done Zoom conversations before, and at first when we were doing these we had to explain to everyone what this was all about, but now I feel like everybody's been on these Zoom Q&As already, and I hope you've all watched the film already. Otherwise there might be spoilers. Have you all watched the film? Give me a nod, raise your hands, give it an applause. We can't really hear you. You are all muted. And as we start the conversation, I'll ask a few questions and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. And of course, I'll turn things over to you guys. If you have a question, simply write it in the chat box. If for some reason you can't access the chat box, raise your hand and we will try to get to you. But write your question in the chat box and we'll contact you directly from behind the scenes and open your mic so you can ask the question directly. I think now that it's 8:32, I'll just start with some housekeeping and introductions. First of all, upcoming films. We're starting to do this. We're getting back in action here. And we're starting to run our films on a weekly basis and give you access to great films. I realized today, Netflix is wonderful, but it also has a lot of terrible movies on it. And if you're starting to get to those terrible movies, you're gonna wanna look for some alternatives, and independent film is the best thing you can be supporting right now. So this gives me an opportunity to thank IFC, who is the distributor of this film, and we were supposed to screen this film, tonight's film Resistance. We were supposed to screen, I think it was the weekend that we were closing, that we ended up closing down. It was like right, it was right as we closed down. It was our next film, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity to pick this up and have the conversation, and Zoom allows us to have a conversation both with Jesse Eisenberg, the star of the film, and Jonathan Jakubowicz, the director of the film, and I'm going to jump into introducing them more in a moment. In the meantime, I also want to give a big thank you to Tamar Simon of Mean Streets Management, who made this possible. Our upcoming films, next week we have the film Abe on the 24th, and that's when we have the conversation. You could watch these movies at any time online. Just check out jccfilm.org. We're also doing a conversation with the director of Incitement, which was out in theaters already and is now available for special screenings online. We're doing a conversation with the creator of Unorthodox, the Netflix series that's become a huge hit. That's going to be on our Tikkun Shavuot, the all-night event. And then on June 7th, we have our Israel Film Center Festival, the best new films out of Israel, June 7th till the 14th. So be sure to check all that out at jccfilm.org and check out the full lineup and be a part and join us and help us spread the word too. Tonight's film, Resistance, there's much to discuss, and I think it's a fantastic film, and I have a lot of questions about both the production and the storytelling, and I want to dive right into it. I've learned that this was also made with an interesting production team, and the director, Jonathan Jakubowicz, is here with us tonight. Jonathan, you want to give a wave, say hi, so we all know who you are. And of course, the star of the film, everyone. Hey, Jonathan, thank you for being here. And Jesse Eisenberg is here with us, the star of the film. Jesse's, if you're not familiar with Jesse's films, it's a long list of films, but you had last seen him possibly at the JCC as the executive producer of The World Beneath My Feet, which if you have not seen that film yet, especially now, interestingly, as we're all kind of closed off from our city, it's a great way to explore the city and reminisce on the city that was. So check that out. Jesse, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Isaac.
I recommend everyone to move, although it's fun to look at our 9 pages of friends here, of this community, and it's great to have this community here. I recommend switching to speaker view at this point. So you see the individual speakers or somebody close to the individual speaker, and then you could check back in every once in a while on the gallery view, so you could see everybody who's there and say hello to your friends. But let me start by asking Jonathan, let's start with you. What inspired you to make this film? And where did it all come from? A little bit of the background.
I come from a family of Holocaust survivors on both sides. I never really thought I could make a movie set in the Holocaust. There's been so many that are great. And it's so emotional to me that I thought it was going to be too hard for me to tackle the subject. But then I found this story that, it's truly unique and different from anything I've seen in that era. And I couldn't believe it. I knew about Marcel Marceau as a mime. I had no idea that he survived the war, and I had no idea that he learned to mime by saving children during the war. So I started doing research, and I ended up tracking down his first cousin, Georges Loinger, who was living in Paris at the time at 106 years old. And I was premiering my last film at the Cannes Film Festival, and I was able to set up a meeting with him in Paris and went there and spoke to him for a long time. And everything he said made me feel that there was nothing I should do with my life other than making sure that this story was told. And that's what I've done since.
Fantastic. And just so you all know, Jonathan is one of the most accomplished directors in Venezuela. I think you have the record of the highest grossing film in Venezuela, if that's true, and of course also much success internationally. By the way, people are writing in the comments. Don't read the comments, but I'll tell you that people are writing how much they love the film and how wonderful it was.
Thank you.
Jesse, so maybe just to bring us into Jesse a little bit, how did you cast? How did this happen? How did you guys get together? And I don't know which one of you wants to start. Sorry, Jonathan.
When I was writing the script, as always as a writer, you start thinking of your dream cast and who could possibly play this role. And I did some research, and I learned that Jesse's mother was a professional clown, and she used to basically paint her face in white to go to work. And Jesse grew up seeing that. And I also learned that he also lost family in the Holocaust. So I had the feeling he was going to connect with the story. And I think midway through the writing, I started writing it for him, thinking of him. And once it was, I had a draft, I sent it to him, and then we started a process of collaboration in which we worked together on the script for a long time. And the process didn't end up until, well beyond after we were done shooting. We created this thing together, and we're still together doing Zooms.
And Jesse, from your perspective, what did you know about this whole story, and how did it? Why was it of interest to you?
I knew nothing of the story. I didn't know Marcel Marceau was Jewish. I didn't know what he looked like beyond, the character that he created. As Jonathan said, I had these kind of biographical connections to the story. I lost family in the war. My mother was a clown, which is a kind of, let's say, younger, less respected brother of miming. And, but I think the thing I connected to the most about the story, and what I like about it the most, is that it's really about this kind of self-centered artist who becomes this kind of reluctant hero, and then learns to better his artistry through helping others. And it's just something I think about all the time, because I am a self-centered artist and constantly trying to reconcile like how the kind of selfish stuff that I do, the navel gazing that I do as part of my work, can have some like immediate benefit in the way that those who work in the social services have. And I'm married to a person who works in nonprofit world, who spends 7 days a week helping those most vulnerable. So I'm constantly trying to reconcile like my own egotistical exercises with trying to do something good. And that's what the movie is about. Marceau starts as this kind of self-centered, young, arrogant artist, and reluctantly becomes a kind of guardian for these kids, ultimately learning to love them and his art.
How do you, I don't know how you live with yourself. How do you live with yourself? No. What did you do to prepare for this role? Did you actually, playing Marcel Marceau, although you're not playing Marcel Marceau mostly in the way we all have seen him, but which gave you some freedom. But did you do any kind of research for the role?
Yeah, Jonathan found this unbelievable teacher, this guy who's, his name is Lauren Eric Salm. He's in LA. He studied, he's a mime teacher in Los Angeles. He studied with Marceau in France at Marceau School for many years. And since then has become a kind of like unofficial chronicler of Marceau's life. So I studied with him for months in a kind of like two-pronged way. One was like the practical application of mime, learning these routines that he choreographed in the style of Marceau. And then I also learned like the history of mime, in a kind of academic way. This guy, my teacher, Lauren, he had like pictures that no one else had. He had video that no one else had of Marceau. And he's obsessed with him in his life in a really wonderful way. So it was this perfect kind of two-pronged attack. And it was a joy. As an actor, you're kind of a dilettante. You kind of study something for, a few weeks, get good enough to look credible, and then immediately forget it. This, by virtue of how long it took for pre-production, because it was a complicated film, and the level that I had to get to, it took about 6 or 7 months, and it was a joy.
Which is a perfect segue, because the production of this film is amazing. Could you tell us a little bit, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about the background of how this film was made? Where was it shot? This was, it really, you feel like you had access to the streets, and it made me feel like I was somehow in that era there. And how did you make the production feel so authentic?
Well, thank you. It's an incredible thing to hear because of how hard the whole thing was. My wife, Carole Jakubowicz, produced the movie, so she really is responsible for making that miracle happen. It was a big effort. It ended up being a co-production between the U.S., the Czech Republic, Germany, and the United Kingdom. We shot half the movie in the Czech Republic, the other half in Germany. Most of the streets you see are in the Czech Republic, and most of the interiors are in Germany, and then the forest in the Alps is in Germany, which proved to be very, emotional in a completely different level, because you're shooting this movie in many of the places where it took place, and where my family survived, and where part of my family was killed. And we were staying a few blocks from Hitler's apartment in Munich, and we shoot some stuff in Nuremberg, where the Nazi rallies used to take place. So there wasn't a dull moment, They never felt like we were just shooting a movie. It always felt like we were doing something that, directly connected us to our ancestors and to our families. And at the same time, we were shooting with a big part of the crew was German. And as it happens, when you work with Germans, a lot of them have grandfathers who were on the other side of the story. So it did feel like a creative vengeance against the Nazis to be doing this, working together and making sure that it was captured the right way.
And obviously it's just a very high quality production. The suspense in the film is unbelievable. I'd say I haven't been at the edge of my seat like that in a very long time. The train scene, that's just wild. How much, I mean, obviously to create that kind of suspense, are these parts of a true story? Are these things that you just brought as on your own, or where did they come from?
Well, I don't think I can take credit for how suspenseful must have been to save children, during the Holocaust. I mean, the odds were completely against them, and it was every second that they were able to pull off was a miracle. Um, I say the movie is inspired by a true story because among other reasons, it takes place or 7 years, and we had to, have a story that makes creative sense and dramatic sense in 2 hours. But most of it is literally, an adaptation of something that came from either George or other testimonies and from research I did. And there is an effort to make it more concise and combining some episodes, but the tension is the tension they must have felt, and if anything, we fell short. I can only imagine what it feels like to really have orphans at your but under your responsibility and have Nazi officers chasing you. Klaus Barbie was famous for chasing Jewish children. That's one of one of the charges he was sentenced was because of the children from the orphanage of Iseo that he sent to a concentration camp. He was particularly obsessed. He was obsessed with the French resistance and Jewish children, and it must have felt horrific to have that monster chasing after you. So it was my responsibility to sort of convey that tension, and I'm glad to hear that you felt it. I think you're muted now.
Unmute myself. There we go. Sorry. Now I'm back.
Okay.
I'm going to open questions to the audience in just a moment. So folks, you could prepare your questions or ask them in the chat so we can call on you. But, and some of you have already, but just as my last question for now, I wanted to know the importance of telling the story today. And I'm going to start with you this time, Jesse. Why is it so important to tell the story in today's world? Is this just to remember the history, or is there more to it?
Obviously the most kind of significant parallel is that, anti-Semitism, along with so many other forms of, hatred, are still present. While we were filming this movie, the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh happened, amongst other less notable acts of anti-Semitism. But there are other reasons to tell this story that are not connected to feelings of anti-Semitism, whether it be as Jonathan puts it, a civilian hero. Here's a mime who's the least likely to be heroic and under these shocking circumstances. In the same way as we're looking at people who are heroes today that 2 months ago we didn't consider heroes. Not just obviously we always think of people on the front lines of healthcare as but people who are delivering pizzas now, and things that jobs that we didn't consider heroic 2 months ago, suddenly people are putting their lives at risk in a way that we probably never considered. And so so there are other and as I was saying before, also the way my character is an artist but kind of figures out how to reconcile being an artist and being a humanitarian, being a hero, and having that not in any way compromise his art, So, I think for those reasons, as well as just reminding people about anti-Semitism or other forms of similar hatred, is important.
Jonathan, for you, did you want to add to that?
Well, I can tell you my family got to Venezuela from Poland escaping anti-Semitism. Venezuela was a very friendly country to Jews for many decades. But then Hugo Chavez was elected and he was anti-Semitic, and we ended up leaving Venezuela. So that would make it the third country my mother has to leave right now. She lives in Israel. You know, she left Poland and she left Venezuela because of anti-Semitism. You never know when an extremely friendly country to Jews can change. You know, obviously, we all feel the United States is different, but I think it's important to tell the stories everywhere, and I think the United States is not immune to changing, and we have to, you know, do everything we can to make sure everyone is aware, not only others, because there is a limit to how much you can change anti-Semitic feelings, but, you know, for ourselves, to know where we come from and to know, you know, where hatred comes from, and how to handle it and how to take responsibility in case of an event, you know, to make sure that we do everything within our power to make a difference.
Thank you so much. This is really extremely important. A lot of people have joined us while we were talking, and some people have asked where they can see the entire conversation because they joined late. We'll have this on our YouTube channel, and we'll post this on our Facebook page too for JCC Films. So be sure if you missed parts, you can check it all out there. But now there's some great questions from the audience, and I'd like Aisha, you have a question for Jonathan. Aisha, you're on.
Hi, I'm Aisha. Congratulations on the film to both Jonathan and Jesse. Okay, so my question for Jonathan is, why did you decide to tell the story from the Marcel Marceau angle rather than just making a film about the French Jewish resistance during World War II and its efforts to help children? Because I realized, like, by the end of the film, I truly felt that it was ultimately a film about the survival of Jewish children in World War II.
Well, the reason, you know, you need a character that's unique and that you can engage with, and Marcel had something that I feel is very universal and very unique to his story, but also very telling of who we are as people, which is he's reluctant, he's self-centered, he doesn't want to be a hero, and he thinks that this event, the war, is this exterior force that is stopping him from fulfilling his dreams. And I think through the journey, Marcel not only becomes a hero, but also becomes the artist that he's meant to become. And the feeling that sometimes that thing that's stopping you from becoming who you are meant to be is the very element that helps you achieve your dreams and find the artist that, or the human being that you're meant to become, to me was very powerful. And that's why it was told from his perspective. You know, I mean, I think you can tell many stories about the survival of the Jewish children and the network that was created in France. When I met with George Loinger, he was 106, and the first thing he said is, "Why are you making a movie about Marcel and not about me? You know, I'm the real hero here." And you know, at the end of the day, I think he deserves his own movie. And there's so many great stories around this circle, but I fell in love with the Marcel story, and that's why I decided to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Barbara. Barbara, you're up. Barbara?
Can you hear me okay?
We hear
I'm
you.
trying to unmute.
Now she's muted.
Can you hear me now?
We do.
Okay, sorry about that. So I have several family members who were in the French Resistance. And when I look at those family members, they were not what one would think are extraordinary people. They were just regular people. And my question is, what did you learn about the members of the resistance that shaped the script, shaped the film? What did you learn about these regular people?
It was exactly that, you know, the first of all, that they were regular people. Also that they didn't think of themselves as heroic. You know, we look back and we see the French Resistance as this group of heroes and we admire them. but to them it was the normal thing to do. You know, they just couldn't believe not everybody was doing that. You know, and it was interesting when the girl who plays Emma in the film, Clémence Bossy, she's French, and her grandmother was in the French Resistance, and that's what she told her all the time, that not only they didn't think of themselves as hero, but they also had no idea what they were doing, you know, because they weren't trained for this. They didn't have a strategic plan from the beginning. They were just trying to, you know, do their best with what they have. And what I learned the most is that you should always do what's right. You know, it's not what is achievable, but what's right. You find out if it's achievable, and what is achievable, and what is the most effective resistance, which is in a way the subject of the movie. But there is no option not to do anything in a situation of abuse and murder and a dictatorship or in an extermination. And what I learned is that there's never an excuse to simply be silent and look the other way. You always have to do your part and think big to try to, you know, stop injustice from happening.
Thank you.
Jerry Pollack mentions here in our comments that he loved that resistance is not just fighting, but survival of oneself and the children. And I think that's an interesting thought, that it's a different look on resistance. I'm going to hand things over to Michelle. Michelle, you have a question. Michelle, can you hear us?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I was trying to do that. Sorry about that. I think it's unbelievable that I didn't know that Marcel Marceau was Jewish. I didn't know any of this. Anybody I spoke to after I saw the film, which was a short while ago, nobody knew. And I just think it's unbelievable, and how powerful it is that a film like this just brings all this knowledge. So that's my comment. Now my question. The hardest scene for me, and I'm assuming for anybody who watches this, is the scene where the two sisters are caught. And I forgot his name, the Nazi who tortured one
Klaus Barbie.
by essentially, sorry?
Klaus Barbie.
Yes, Klaus Barbie. Is that true to history? Is it what was told to you? I know as viewing the film, I had such difficulty with it. Do the actors have difficulty with a scene like that?
Why did you have to do that to us? That's the
Well, Barbie's crimes are very well documented. He was put on trial in France, and it was a very public trial. There is a museum in Lyon called the Museum of the Resistance, where they have a theater, and it shows a 3-hour documentary on the trial of Klaus Barbie, and you hear from a ton of his victims and families of his victims. There's also a documentary called Hotel Terminus that you can probably find on YouTube online, and it really describes a lot of what you see in the film in a lot more detail and in honestly way more harrowing ways. You know, I mean, we made an effort to show the horror, but there isn't a drop of blood in that sequence. You know, we try to not exploit the violence, but to make it psychological. And, you know, obviously sometimes that is even tougher because the brain, you know, does what we're not doing. But it's literally what he did, and it's all based on research. And it was definitely tough for the actors, for the actresses, was incredibly tough. I mean, they were very well prepared, and we were able to shoot it quickly because of how, you know, intense the whole situation was and how quickly they got the performance right. I think it was the only day in the whole shoot that we came home earlier because we had the scene. But it's never easy, you know, to shoot a situation like that. But by then, you know, we've been shooting for a while. The actors were in a very collaborative dynamic. Although Clemence, the actress, was very keen on not being friendly with Matthias, who plays Klaus Barbie, because it's part of her process. But it was definitely intense for all of us, and that big moment that ends the scene, that it's very hard to watch. It was very hard to watch for us on set. I mean, I couldn't even say cut, because of how emotional it was, and the whole crew started looking at each other like, wow, we're doing something very important here, and I'm glad it's coming across with that level of intensity.
Thank you.
Anne, you have a question. We're opening things for Anne.
Oh, Anne, me?
Yep.
Yeah, oh, okay. Yeah, I just thought it was, well, number one, it was pertinent to now because, we're going through a lot now, and you realize as bad as it is now, you can see how bad it was then. I mean, we don't have Nazis chasing us. But the other thing is the children, how they changed, how they adapted to the situation, and how I think we're adapting to the new normal. I just thought that was interesting. And I also found the costumes and the scenery was fabulous. The train scene was so chilling. And I'm just wondering from Jesse, was he petrified on the train? He's just a fabulous actor, but it wasn't really like acting. It felt so real. How did he feel?
Oh, thanks, Anne.
Yeah, you're a wonderful actor.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, the scene, it was my favorite scene in the movie, specifically when Klaus Barbie asks me if I have any advice for him as a parent, because he's trying to, encourage his daughter. That scene was written probably a week before we started shooting the movie, which is totally anomalous for this film. Sometimes that happens in movies. This was totally unusual because Jonathan had, I think he wanted to have a kind of, some kind of dialogue between, what is ultimately the protagonist and antagonist of this movie. And, but instead of kind of a confrontation, he came up with this kind of just brilliant, inspired, very unusual and clever and possibly even more realistic idea that they'd be talking about the arts, and that you'd not only see this other side of Barbie, but that you'd see Marceau kind of shocked to see the human beyond the monster. Which is, like Hannah Arendt says, probably more scary, that they can appear in, sheep's clothing, or as a good father, or as just a boring guy asking about his daughter. But also Marceau sees the humanity in this guy. It's interesting. I mean, not that it absolves him of any of his terrifying act, but just the shock that this guy has something stirring underneath. And then one thing which I'll just mention that Jonathan has mentioned before is just that, there was such a rigidity to the structure of Nazism and to their mindset, such kind of rigid dogmatism. And what Marceau says to him is, don't push her, let her figure it out herself. And it's interesting because it just shows two worldviews that are in opposition, not just two people.
Let me just add on to that question for a moment, that just talking about the children that Anne brought up, if production wasn't hard enough using this film and connecting it with children too, I hope, what was that experience like? How was it working with the children? How did you find all these children for these roles, and did they understand what they were getting into? That's for both. Jesse, you could start.
Yeah, the kids were unusually great. Unusual because, there's the adage is to not work with children or animals or also snow. And we had 2 out of the 3 with this. But the kids were amazing. They were all, the main core kids were all hired from this Jewish school in Prague. And so they all had a connection to, family who were lost in Central Europe. And so not only were they kind of aware of Jewish things like the songs they had to sing or the prayers they had to say, but they were connected in some, really fundamental and tragic ways to this story. And so I think they had a real appreciation for what they were doing. Even, even at a young age, they had a kind of vague appreciation for the importance that this movie had for their family. And so the kids were not just actor kids, they were, kids that were connected to what we were doing. And it was just amazing. They were also, because they knew each other, because they all came from the school, there was a sense of camaraderie. I will say, as an actor, like, nothing was better for me than performing mime for these kids, because I had practiced these routines for about 7 months prior to performing it for kids. And once I started doing these routines that I had kind of memorized by rote and, punished myself for getting little things wrong over the course of 7 months, it was completely freeing to do it for these kids, because suddenly I had a totally different barometer. I had been kind of like, aware of the, minute gestures that I was getting wrong. When I was performing for these kids, the only thing that was important was making them laugh. And it just kind of freed me up. And I think it's exactly what would happen to Marceau. He's a guy who was performing in these kind of dive bars for unappreciative adults. And then he found himself performing for these kids, reluctantly at first, but performing for kids nonetheless. And I think probably found the joy in something that he had, been practicing alone for so long.
Jonathan, do you want to add on to that? Your work with the kids?
Yeah, I mean, it was a joy. I mean, what Jesse said, the kids' grandparents were Holocaust survivors as well, and we met with the families, and they were very passionate about the story, and they loved Jesse, and they were staying for a while in the castle that you see in the film, so it felt like Harry Potter for them, because they were away from their families, sleeping together in a castle. And also Bella Ramsey, the girl who plays the main girl, Elspeth, she's actually a professional actress. She was in Game of Thrones, and I think is one of the most talented actresses in the world, and definitely of her generation. And she auditioned for the role, and it was, mind blowing. And she really bonded with the rest of the kids. She's not Jewish, but she learned all the songs. She learned all the mannerism, and she really bonded with Jesse. And I think she really steals the show in many of the moments, but definitely on the train for sure.
Let's take one more question from the audience. I think John Wexler. John, you're on.
Great, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Jonathan, you guys mentioned this a few times, that casting took into consideration Jesse's ancestry. I thought that was really interesting and not unusual, because also in Hunters on Amazon Prime, Logan Lerman also has ancestry that was connected to the Holocaust. And I was curious then and now how, if at all, that plays into your acting, Jesse, if that drove anything, and what went through your mind to help kind of fill that role for Marceau?
Yeah, I mean, well, I had been kind of like interested in the Holocaust, probably like a lot of Jewish people in my generation, which is, I would say, the generation after people were not talking about it at all. So I would say like a lot of people my age, Jewish people, like became really interested in a way that I think my parents probably didn't feel comfortable asking their parents, who either lost family or were part of that generation. And so like, for me, I was kind of like using this opportunity to like initially just fill out the missing parts of this history that I was already really well aware of. But then when we were filming there, we were filming in Munich and Nuremberg, it took on a kind of more emotional, visceral feeling for me. Just by way of example, like we were filming in Munich, which is like 20 minutes outside of Dachau, or rather Dachau is 20 minutes outside of Munich. And so I took my, at the time, 1-year-old son and wife, whose age is irrelevant, of course, to Dachau. And my kid was like running around where the barracks were, which are now just overgrown, with weeds. And he was like laughing and cackling and running around, and I was chasing him to try to get him back because I was embarrassed that he was laughing in this very solemn location. And then it occurred to me that the scene we had just filmed in the movie was about how resisting, it's more important to survive. If you want to resist, it's not that important to pick off one Nazi at a time. It's actually important to survive, to save these kids. And as I saw my Jewish son running around the barracks where, his ancestors would have been killed. It made me, I don't know, kind of put things together in a new way for me. I think about that moment all the time. And I remember like people kind of looking at my son. I was nervous that they were going to yell at me for bringing a kid who was 1 year old to a concentration camp, and he's laughing. And they were looking like warmed by the situation because it's such a horrific situation. But to see a kid laughing, I don't know, just kind of makes the world seem like it righted itself.
Before we part, I had one last question that I wanted to ask for the audience. Based on both of your research that you've done for this film, what would you say are the follow-up materials? Where can people learn more? I'm sure I know that there's a lot more questions. I'm seeing a lot of the questions here, and people want to know more about Marceau, want to know more about the children who survived. Are there good resources that you feel connect nicely to a follow-up for this film? I think Jonathan, are you muted? You're playing with your screen. We can't hear you. Jesse, do you want to start?
Sure. Jonathan is like an encyclopedia. He would be able to tell you far more interesting things. There's a documentary on the lawyer who represented Barbie. This guy is like this very interesting French philosopher who took on these cases to just rail against the French government. And I forgot his name, but the movie is amazing. But again, Jonathan, there's two movies that our actors are in. Geza Rohrig is in The Son of Saul. He plays George, my cousin, who is the character that Jonathan met, the guy who Jonathan met with, who is 106 years old. The guy who plays my father, Carole Markovitz, is in The Counterfeiters. That's a great Holocaust movie as well. Carl is not Jewish, but he plays Jews so frequently that he knows enough about it, and then revealed to Jonathan on set that he's also played a Nazi. So that's what actors do in Austria these days. But Jonathan knows far more about, I can tell you everything. Where is he? Did he leave?
He fell off.
I'm here. I'm back. I'm back. Yeah, there was an Amber Alert, so I lost all the connection, but now I'm back.
Wow. Are you in Israel right now?
No. Amber Alert is in LA.
Oh, that kind of Amber Alert. Got it.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Some follow-up resources for people to be able to follow up with those who couldn't ask questions. How could they find out more, learn more? What were some of the kind of like, you got to see this documentary about Marceau, whatever? What other resources are there?
Well, there's a great book called Survival as Resistance. There is, there's a ton of information in the Holocaust museums. There is a great book called The Holocaust by Lawrence Rees. I have it here. Sorry, it looks like this. The Holocaust by Lawrence Rees. I have read many books on the Holocaust. This is, to me, the most interesting one because it doesn't focus on the size of the crime, but on the process of the society, the German society, how it happened, how step by step from its origin, how the dehumanization of the Jews and the constant campaign to brainwash German society happened. And it's, to me, was very revealing because the hardest thing about the Holocaust to me has always been understanding how human beings were capable of doing that. And I really feel that book explains it. And it's very important, especially considering everything that's going on in the world with populism and how we are entering right now the terrible combination of populist in power with hunger and unemployment. So I think it's very important to study Germany, probably more than ever since World War II, and I highly recommend that book. And I mean, the rest is really, scattered online, and I'm always happy to answer questions on, Twitter or social media. If they find me, I can give them my answer.
And I see there's also some resources being posted in the chat. I want to say that this film, I mean, it's a huge film. It's really important. I think it has amazing impact. And one of the sad things about this virus, actually, Jesse, specifically, I thought last year when you were at the JCC for The World Beneath My Feet, Annette Insdorf, who led that conversation, we both go to the Jerusalem Film Festival every year, and we said, oh, we should invite Jesse he should go to the Jerusalem Film Festival. And then I thought this year, this film would be the perfect opener of the Jerusalem Film Festival on a huge screen under the stars. Unfortunately, the festival is probably not going to run, nor do I curate their program, so I can't take responsibility for that. But I feel like due to these times, in some ways, kind of the bombastic response that this film needs is not really possible. On the other hand, and this is where I turn to everybody here in the audience and all 200 of you who are on this call, this film can now be seen by everyone in the United States easily, as hopefully most of you saw it. And that means you should tell all your friends if there's something you should be posting about. People are home, people have time. They should be watching great films and important films like this one and spreading the word about it and giving this film really its worthy attention. So Jonathan and Jesse, I want to thank you both for this film and for being here tonight and for this conversation.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it will be at the Haifa Film Festival in October. So there is that, you know, it's not Jerusalem, but it's going to be Haifa. Hopefully in October, film festivals will exist again.
Hopefully. The most important thing, folks, everyone, I hope you are healthy, stay inside as much as possible, keep away from other people. This is serious, and we want you to be able to get back together very soon in a real theater and see these movies like they should be seen. Thank you all, and have a good night. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.